As they begin the first course of what will be a good many, we'll be back with more of the President's banquet on his last night in Peking in a moment.
America. Merrill Lynch is bullish on America. And we've got a lot of ways to help you share in America's growth. Stocks, of course, but also real estate financing, municipal bonds, retirement security programs, corporate bonds, mutual funds, and more. Merrill Lynch has a lot of ways to put your money to work. Merrill Lynch is bullish on America.
I used my American Express card 20 minutes ago for lunch here in Paris.
The American Express card is like having cash with you. It's cash in your pocketbook.
The American Express card is recognized in practically every country in the world that I have ever visited. The American Express card is indeed a universal card.
The American Express card is the best thing to travel with besides my husband.
Call 800-AE8-5000 to apply for an American Express money card.
Did I say you could call me?
No, but...
Well?
I had an idea.
Congratulations.
It's about getting married.
Oh. Well, what makes you think I'd marry you?
Does that mean no?
No.
Well, then.
You talked me into it.
That's the idea behind everything we make. The phones, all the equipment that connects them, the care, dedication, and pride. All this to help two hearts and minds come closer. Western Electric, we're at the heart of the Bell system. We make things that bring people closer.
Let's return now to the Great Hall of the People in Peking and the banquet which Mr. Nixon is giving for his Chinese hosts and Bernard Kell.
Well, Charles, course number 1 has begun. I think the other night there were about a dozen courses in all, and some veterans of that meal have assured me that the banquet was absolutely splendid. As you know, the banquet is taking place in the Great Hall of the People, a rather massive, cavernous building that was put up, we're told, in 10 months. In 1959, the 10th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. If you had the resources, you could hire this banquet hall and hold an intimate dinner for your friends, 5,000 of them at one time. Tonight, I've been told that the guest list would approximate the guest list of the dinner that Premier Joe hosted Monday night, that is to say about 500 people. There is the President, Mrs. Nixon, Secretary of State Rogers, Dr. Kissinger, and the members of the rather small American official party. There's the American Press Corps, which is rather large, an unorganized army, or something of that effect, is what President Nixon jokingly referred to it today as.
I hope he was joking. Speaking of the menu, Bernie, the cooks in the classical Chinese restaurants in the United States were a little bit offhand about the menu. They didn't think it was the greatest dinner. They felt that the Chinese, in an attempt to be polite, had given the Americans the kind of Chinese dishes perhaps to which they're used here. It seems to me from the looks of the menu that is being served on the President's behalf that it's a little bit more elaborate than the first one. Maybe it's the Chinese think that the Americans have got used to the delicacies and subtleties and complexities of the Chinese cuisine.
Well, I think the Americans may want to out-Chinese the Chinese when it comes to hosting a banquet here. There's no question that everybody's been filling up, you might say, on Chinese food. Many of us have been eating Chinese food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I have not really heard anyone say, let's have lunch at a Chinese restaurant here. And we find it very, very good. Some dishes a lot better than others, but a surprising diet of food, even at the hotel where we're staying. You see Eric Severide, some of our CBS people at that table.
Ross Terrell on the food department. you're an expert on Chinese cooking, and in that remarkable pair of articles you wrote for the Atlantic Monthly, which will be a book, or be the core of a book next month, you spoke in the highest terms of the food that was available on all levels in Peking.
Yes, Charles, I think this is one point where the general Puritanism of Chinese society lapses. No one objects to eating heartily, however leftist they may be.
And do you think that the food in contemporary China is up to that of the old days?
Well, I can't personally compare it, but people who have are inclined to say that it is. There are a few westernized touches. The Chinese people are developing a taste for ice cream these days, which has never previously been part of the things Chinese people like to eat. It's one reason why they want to import some sugar. They can't produce enough to make the ice cream that the Chinese people want.
Well, the president, if I'm not mistaken, Bernie, has imported some things for this dinner. California champagne, which they seem to be drinking there, and also some California orange and grapefruit sections, which are going into beef flavored with orange and so on.
Well, I don't know what they're actually drinking at this particular point, but I noticed that they're using a very small glass, and they're taking the slimmest of sips, which to me would suggest another bout with Mao Tai. Mao Tai has caught on with some of the Americans here. I know that some people have been buying Mao Tai, which comes in a white plastic bottle, as souvenirs to take back. It's terribly, terribly strong stuff. I think the other day we described it as liquid razor blades. More people seem to be drinking something called ginger, which has a bit of gin. There's Mao Tai. There it is in the white plastic bottle. The trick is to sip just a little of it. That is to say, if you want to go through the diplomatic etiquette of toasting without actually drinking.
We'll be back in a moment with more of the President's Banquet in Peking after a pause for a station break.
This is CBS.
We're all in this game together, and the rules keep changing every day. In this world, you can't afford to be an innocent bystander. Stay ahead of the game with Jerry Dunphy on the big news at 6 and the 11 o'clock report, weeknights on Channel 2.
A new American is born every 9 seconds to accommodate additional millions every decade. America scars more and more land, fouls more and more air. Our population doesn't have to grow like that if family planning help were available to all who want it. Planned Parenthood provides family planning programs, education, and research. Overpopulation, it's your problem too. Support Planned Parenthood.
KNXT Channel 2.
This is a CBS News special report. The President in China. Banquet for the Chinese. Here now is CBS News correspondent Charles Collingwood.
It's Friday night now in Peking, and President Nixon at this moment is giving a banquet for his Chinese hosts at the Great Hall of the People, where Premier Zhou Enlai hosted a dinner the first night Mr. Nixon was in Peking, and now we're reciprocating. Let's go now to Bernard Kalb for a description of what's going on at the Great Hall.
The band playing music, the guests, about 500 of them, having begun the first course of a 10-course dinner or so. Midway, President Nixon will leave the table, mount the rostrum, and deliver a toast that he has alerted the American press to in an informal remark earlier today when the president visited the Forbidden City. The food here, of course, has been absolutely marvelous. If I may just have a moment for a personal digression, Charles and Ross, I'd like to tick off only a few of the dishes I can remember that were served for a lunch or at a casual lunch at the National Hotel where the American press is staying. It opened with cold chicken, Then they served some jiaozi, which is little dumplings filled with some meat combination. They followed that up with barbecued spare ribs. Then came a dish of sour pickles that were absolutely marvelous, spicy, tasty. And then a huge Peking pot, which was filled with soup and noodles, vermicelli, chicken, vegetables, choy sam bok chai, Chinese cabbages, beef, prawns. That was lunch today.
Bernie, this is breakfast time here. You're making, you know, dear me.
Well, you know, you can have some of that for breakfast if you want. A colleague of mine here, a photographer, joined us at the table rather early yesterday morning at about 7 o'clock or so, perhaps even earlier, because yesterday, if my memory was right, was Thursday, so it must have been a great wall. Well, anyway, he ordered a Chinese breakfast, and there really is no difference, it seems, between a Chinese breakfast, a Chinese lunch, or a Chinese dinner. The dishes just keep coming.
Well, your description of that meal makes me feel very full already at this time in the United States.
As they will tonight. Incidentally, the prices might be of some interest. You may have heard that the price for hotels, if we go on the price that a single American correspondent here will be charged, the price for his private room, a modest room by American standards, a very good room by Chinese standards, the price for his room for all 3 meals every day for the week that we will be here, or that is to say the 8 days we will be here in China, will cost $150.
Does that include your food at the hotel?
We take our food at the hotel when we're there at the hotel, and the hotel, by the way, is keeping that restaurant going 24 hours because of the erratic work shifts here. Some correspondents, cameramen, technical people working at different hours of the day, and they keep a staff going around the clock to make sure that you can have a meal at any time. And I must say, Charles and Ross, it is not a simple pickup meal or a snack when you wander in at 2 o'clock in the morning. You start as though it were a personalized banquet. The dishes come out, and the waitresses and the waiters at the hotel, there's a very, very limited amount of English available. But they get the message, and if we say Chinese, we're asked Chinese or Western, and you make your decision, and most of us obviously have been choosing Chinese straight along. And the dishes come out in endless succession with some absolutely splendid tea.
We'll be back and look some more at this banquet and at the marvelous food they're eating in a moment.
How good are the credit cards you carry?
I did use another card up until about 6 months ago. It was just turned down in too many places. So I started using American Express, and I've been very happy.
The American Express credit card is accepted virtually everywhere. It's never let me down.
I do a lot of entertaining being an insurance agent. I never have to ask what cards they accept. I just take out my American Express.
Call 800-AE8-5000 to apply for an American Express money card.
At Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on America, and we've got a lot of ways to help you share in America's growth. Over-the-counter stocks, for example. Investors are looking for fast-growing companies, and we think the over-the-counter market is a good place to find them. Ask us about over-the-counter stocks or most any kind of investment. Merrill Lynch has a lot of ways to put your money to work. Merrill Lynch is bullish on America.
Back at the banquet, which Mr. Nixon is giving for Premier Zhou Enlai and other Chinese guests on this, his final day in Peking. Among the guests at this banquet, as at the first one, and a frequent member of the party, has been Miss Wang, who is Chairman Mao's niece. Dr. Ross Terrell of Harvard is with us again this morning. What role does she play, Dr. Terrell? Any special one in this affair?
Well, Charles, what strikes me is that both Mao's wife and his niece have been rather to the fore. And I think probably that Miss Wang, who was present as President Nixon spoke each day with Zhou Enlai, may have been the one that then went to her uncle, Chairman Mao Zedong, after those meetings and gave the chairman the gist of what Nixon and Zhou had been talking about. She's very young, though she's been suddenly elevated to a position of number 2 on protocol in the foreign ministry. It's only a few years ago that she was an English student at Peking University, and then when the UN delegation was selected, suddenly we found her for the first time among the diplomats. So she's had a meteoric rise, which looks to be related to the fact that her uncle is the chairman.
And she's been in on all of these meetings.
She's been one of the few who's been with Zhou Enlai at each of these meetings, and at the meeting with Mao Zedong himself.
Bernard Kalb has drawn attention to the toasts, which will be shortly coming up when they've reached the appropriate point in the meal. After all of these hours of talks, nearly 20 hours of private talks that the President and Premier Zhou Enlai have been having, would you think, Dr. Terrell, that if they have reached any decision, or any decisions, plural, that they probably would have reached them by now?
I guess you're right, Charles. The Chinese talk with foreigners only in Peking, and I think it's unlikely that in Hangzhou and Shanghai there'll be anything more than informal exchanges. What may happen is that each side will want to consult before the communique is written, but I would expect, as you suggest, that the actual hard talking has probably essentially come to an end.
Bernie, I noticed that they're playing typical American music again at this banquet.
Well, as we noted before, they played some typical American music the first night when Premier Zhou gave his banquet for President Nixon. And the President, in his remarks that night, called attention to the music there. He said, "Never have I heard American music played better in a foreign land." Splendid music, he called it.
Well, they were on Home on the Range a minute ago. There they go.
I suppose that if there's more blossoming of this new start in Sino-American relations, the Chinese orchestra here will have to expand its repertoire of Chinese music.
Bernard, one of the things that interests people a great deal is the health of Mao Zedong. Have there been any impressions filtering through of how the President and his party found Mao in terms of his physical appearance and presence?
Not a syllable that I can report.
It has been said that he could only walk with a stick, or that there weren't always nurses in attendance. Could you confirm or deny those 2 points, for instance?
I couldn't comment on any of that, Russ, actually. The only thing we've seen here are the pictures that you saw back there of Chairman Mao welcoming President Nixon, shaking hands, I think at one point, perhaps at the farewell, all 4 hands together. Chairman Mao sitting in a comfortable chair, the President to his right, I beg your pardon, to his left. Chairman Mao smiling in those pictures, looking somewhat perhaps his years. He was 78 years old, I think it was, on December 26th. He's now in his 79th year. And as we know, he has periodically had to fight rumors about his health, and in Hong Kong, among some of the more anti-communist forces there have always been consistent reports of his death and the fact that Chairman Mao has for some years been impersonated. One always looks to that mole on his chin, on the lower side. They tell me the experts use calipers to make sure that the mole is precisely where the Mao Zedong mole should be. But there he was on Monday, welcoming the President very quickly in an unprecedented way. The swiftness. We've seen the People's Daily here, the official organ of the Chinese Communist Party, give it banner headlines with 7 photographs. Again, unprecedented. The first time the President's picture has appeared in the People's Daily, we're told. And so the Chinese have, from their point of view, created an environment, the atmospherics, for the Americans, as they say it, to use the most neutral of phrases, adjust to realities. The word concession need not be used. It is a question of recognizing realities. And we do know that that word realities has been one of the biggest words in the State Department's and in the Nixon administration's vocabulary in its talking about China. It's a recognition of new realities, the realities that exist. And what we see before us now, President Nixon, Secretary of State Rogers, Premier Zhou, Marshal Ye Jianying, is a portrait of reality. And the definition, the calibration of that reality, we may know a bit more about when President Nixon, somewhere in the middle of this banquet, delivers his toast. It will be the President who will speak first, just as Premier Zhou spoke first on Monday.
Unless my eyes mistake me, which is quite possible, I think they're finally bringing out that American champagne that President Nixon flew over. I forget what, something like 50 cases of California champagne, and it might be in that he wishes to propose his toast to Premier Zhou Enlai and all his other hosts in the People's Republic of China.
It would be interesting if they could work out some kind of a compromise. That is to say, instead of using a large cupped champagne glass, they used one of these very small Mao Tai glasses, which is a kind of miniature champagne glass, filled it with champagne, held the champagne glass in the air, the miniature one, and said, "Gambay, bottoms up."
I wouldn't be surprised, Bernard, if the Americans drink most of that champagne. I have found in China that Chinese get very red in the face after champagne, and being aware of that, they might go easy on it as we tend to go easy on the Mao Tai.
Russ, I think we might call upon you to solve a little bit of the mystery in the serving and in the menu tonight. And we know that soup comes at the end of a Chinese meal, but we do notice that there are an awful lot of those small porcelain spoons being used. Would you take care of that culinary mystery, please?
Well, Bernard, non-Chinese often go to extremes more than the Chinese on this question of implements at table. In fact, the Chinese often resort to a spoon. I've sat at tables where the foreigner has wrestled with a slippery shrimp or a piece of pork with a chopsticks, and the Chinese are using a spoon. So it's not only for soup, but for small portions that just can't be picked up with the chopsticks, that the Chinese will use a spoon.
They are, in fact, a practical people.
They are.
I've got a menu here, thanks to the United Press International, which begins with brined duck, two-color fish rolls, prawns with pea flavor, cucumbers, tomatoes and scallions, spiced chicken and beef with orange flavor. That's the California oranges that President Nixon brought with him. Cantonese spiced grilled pork and sausage, bean sprout and pigeon egg soup, 3 delicacies with egg whites, sea cucumbers, chicken slices and prawns, duck cubes in spiced sauce, vegetarian macédoine, a mixture of fruit and vegetables, sweet and sour fish, walnut cream, and pastries including fried rice dumplings and rice cake. So I should think that one might well use a variety of utensils to consume a range of cuisine as extensive as that.
No cottage cheese, I take it.
We'll return in a moment with more live coverage of the President's banquet on the last day of his visit to Peking.